everyone. Welcome to our Psalms of Summer. This is the start of a new series for us. As you might have seen, we're at the Best Western in Morden. They've been so kind and gracious and accommodating to us this morning to film. We're going to be looking at the Psalms for the next couple months, and the Psalms kind of are all over the map. You have expressions of anguish and grief, and you have some high points of joy and happiness and victory. This morning we're going to be talking about Psalms 3, and Psalms 3 is a lament. It's a prayer. It's a morning prayer that David prayed. And so we're going to be looking at that. We're going to be looking at how laments are kind of passionate expressions of grief and sorrow. And laments, they originate in the low points in life. And the Psalms have numerous accounts of like this. I was drawn to the Psalms earlier this, winter and spring. As I walked through a season of anxiety, my cries of desperation, and they found words in the Psalms. The way David interacted with God showed me that my deep longings, the anger, the worry, the fear, could be expressed, and that God cared about them. My hope is that through this series, through this morning, that we can gain some understanding on how laments can be powerful and why there's hope in expressing our fears and worries to God. So we're going to be focusing on Psalms 3 this morning, and if you want some background, some context, that can be found in 2 Samuel 15 and 16. But in those passages we read that David is kind of worried about his role as king. He's still king, but he's experiencing pressure from his father-in-law, Saul, and from his own son named Absalom. And they're pursuing him and trying to take the throne back from him. And so the chapters that follow is kind of David and his loyal followers, families fleeing into the wilderness to escape this. And so this psalm, Psalms 3, is penned in that season of life for David, kind of the turmoil and fear and all that's going on. And so David's situation seems hopeless, and this psalm captures the heart of that desperation. And so, gladly read along in Psalms 3. We're going to start with verses 1 and 2. O Lord, I have so many enemies, and so many are against me. So many are saying God will never rescue him. Sometimes when things are really troubling to me, my starting point of prayers isn't this like long intro kind of acknowledging who God is. It's oh Lord, please help, like this desperate plea. And David doesn't take the time to eloquently word something. He jumps right in. He says, oh Lord, just this expression of deep need and anguish. And he jumps right in. And David's reality was that he felt that everyone was out to get him. And the common belief was that he was going to lose his throne. Many enemies, so many are against me. People don't think I'll be saved. David will have been hiding in the desert, fearing for his life. And I believe most of us had probably had this overwhelming feeling at times that our situations are bigger than what we can handle, and that we're in over our heads. And that unless God does something miraculous, we're done for. And that was the case for David. David was relying on God to do something. And so he continues on with his prayer, verses 3 to 6. But you, O Lord, are a shield around me. You are my glory, the one who holds my head high. I cried out to the Lord, and he answered me from his holy mountain. I lay down and slept, yet I woke up in safety, for the Lord was watching over me, and I'm not afraid of 10,000 enemies who surround me on every side. Let's unpack these verses a little bit, because there's 4 truths, one in each verse, that I think is important for us to kind of catch. Verse 3, we read that the Lord is a shield, and that my glory and we see that he holds David's head high. David writes that God is a shield around him. When enemies are surrounding him, he's protected from all sides. And then he mentions how God is his glory. Though David is king, any fame, any authority he has is because of what God has given him. God is his glory. David realizes that any positive outlook or reputation that he might have is because God's presence is with him. And in the midst of all the horrors going on, David's eyes are not focused on himself. He's aware of what's got him to this point. The blessing of God, his protection, and his presence. Verse 4, we read that David cried out to God and God answered. And there's a couple interesting things going on in this verse. Is David talking about the future? Is he foreseeing the future, or is he referring back to a previous experience? Because he mentions that he cried out and God answered. David is speaking with certainty that God will hear him and will answer. While he will have had past experiences with God's faithfulness, this does refer to the future. The other interesting piece with this is that if we were to read the passages in 2 Samuel, we'd read that he and his loyal followers are escaping to the wilderness, but David then makes a decision to send the Ark of the Covenant back to Jerusalem, to the place where the temple would be built. And the Ark was symbolic of the presence of God, and yet David is acknowledging that God will answer even if he doesn't have access to the Ark of the Covenant. He understands that God's work continues regardless of whether he feels the presence of God with him. The other interesting, if we go on to verse 5, is that David and the people he escaped with will have feared sleeping. And so in verse 5, we read that God sustains. Nighttime will have been an opportunity for almost anyone to have snuck up and captured or killed David or his family. And so David is acknowledging the presence of God that's been carrying him through each day and watching over them as they sleep. Instead of focusing on the few hours of sleep that he was getting or how bad his night of sleep was, David is thankful for the rest that he got, and he woke up rested. David makes sure to note that God is the sustainer. Then we go on to verse 6 and we read that God's peace is so close to David. I'm not afraid of 10,000 enemies. Even when he feels like the whole world might be against him and he feels entirely trapped, he remains confident of the God whom he knows and prays to. The fact that God has carried him and his family for so long, David has a deep trust that God enables him to live with peace. As we go on to verses 7 and 8, it says, "Arise, O Lord, rescue me, my God. Slap all my enemies in the face, shatter the teeth of the wicked. Victory comes from you, O Lord. May you bless your people." David again is writing from a position of confidence, as if the victory had already happened. David shows us how when we feel hopeless, there's still hope in God. Victory, salvation comes from God, and it was revealing, and this would reveal to the readers that God was in control of history. David would go on to accomplish many things after this prayer and after this period of life. He would amass a collection of resources that would build the temple. He would enable Solomon, his son, to lead well into the next few years. It seems one of the interesting and central themes of this passage in Psalms 3 is that God is working on our behalf. And as we trust God and place our confidence in Him, even as we sleep, God is at work. For my brother's graduation, we took a road trip as a family to the West Coast. Many long days driving, and there's a memory for us that we won't forget. And that was after a long day's driving, not knowing where we were going to end up for that evening, that night, we kind of just booked hotels on the fly. And we booked a hotel room. We found one that we liked online. It looked decent, price was right, so we booked it. We arrived at our destination and we immediately began to regret our choice. We picked up our key and went to the room and opened the door and almost immediately made our way back to the office. After some negotiation, it became really clear that we were going to be spending the night there. We weren't going to be winning that argument. And so we spent the night in a dirty hotel room that needed lots of repairs, with neighbors who were passed out on their beds with the door open, TV blaring, and beer cans laying all over the floor. We left before they even put the continental breakfast out. Our night spent there wasn't one of the most enjoyable, but maybe the most memorable. There's something about a road trip or a long journey and being able to stop and rest at a hotel. For me, there's something after a long day of driving and adventuring that you could come back to a place that's your own. Even though you're far from home, it provided you a place of rest and being able to put your guard down. As I processed my journey this week with these thoughts on God's provision and God's care, my heart's response was right away, then why don't I always feel that sense of confidence? What was David doing to receive such care and love, rescue, rest? While I'm walking through my anxiety, why does God feel so far away? And pondering David's life, specifically his time when he wrote this psalm, what can I take away from this? And I came up with two things for us. First, I think it's important to note that from the passage we just studied, we don't find rest in just stopping what we're doing. We find rest, deeper rest, in the acknowledging of what God is doing. There's maybe some small physical benefits to our Sabbath experiences, us stopping and working for a day. But the kind of rest that David is experiencing requires trust on our part. It requires stopping and letting God take care of it. Like David has been reminding us this morning, God is trustworthy. And what this means for us is that our striving can stop, our pressing and our pursuing, as we unpack all the ways that God is working on our behalf. And this is hard to do. My tendency is to fill my schedule. It's to distract my thoughts. It fills my time with other things. And sometimes we need the reminder, like in Matthew 11, that God's been inviting us to give those burdens, the things that are causing us concern and worry, to Him, and we'll find rest, because He is our rest. The second thing is that David reminds us that God is our refuge. When we're feeling bombarded, God's presence remains an ever-present help in trouble. Like Psalm 46 tells us, no matter our direction or our intentions, His presence is with us. David recalls it being like a shield around him, protecting him from all sides. And David recalls his rescue. Now, his rescue didn't mean that all his problems just went away. It was that God was seeing him through, providing peace in chaos, strength in weakness. God longs to be that safe haven for us as well. He doesn't promise us a complete evacuation from what we're facing, but He promises His presence in the midst of it, and He is our rescue. So when you're getting tired from the long journey, put your feet up, because God is our rest and He is our rescue. Have a good day.